This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and it's Smackdown time. There's going to be a couple of Smackdowns with our new 2015 Dell XPS 13 right here. But for starters, we're going to do the MacBook Air, because it's pretty obvious that, well, Dell targeted the MacBook Air and outdid it. It's not often we see the Air not look as good in a Smackdown compared to a Windows laptop, but it's going to happen now. Here it is, the beginning of 2015, and we have two of arguably the hottest Ultrabooks on the market right now. They're not super cheap, but they're not ungodly expensive either. It depends on your viewpoint, but if you're looking at around $1,000 or so, a bit under depending, well, then that's where we are right now. Here, obviously, Big Apple logo, we have the 13-inch MacBook Air. This is the latest generation. Available with Intel Core i5 and i7 CPUs, but interesting CPUs. They're not the usual use series. They're not used as often in Ultrabooks. They have low nominal clock speeds, 1.4 gigahertz for the i5, and you can go 1.7 gigahertz with the Core i7, but they have some big turbo boost, particularly the i7. So good performance thanks to strong turbo boost here. Dell XPS 13 2015 edition. This has the Intel Broadwell 5th generation Core i CPU line inside. Our particular one has a Core i5 clocked at 2.2 gigahertz. That's the base clock speed. You can also get it with the Core i3 or Core i7. Aluminum lids, obviously. Nice, rigid, sturdy builds. Both names that, most of us can trust. I know some of you have your loves and your hates for different companies, but they're established name brand companies, let's put it that way. Both 13.3 inches, but obviously, look right here. This is one of the cool things about the XPS 13. The footprint is like an 11.6 inch. So it's more like the MacBook Air 11.6 inch model, or an even Inspiron 11 right there. So if you're talking about less to carry around, more room in your backpack, or if you're a business traveler, less to carry, score one for the Dell right away. Also, it weighs less, 2.6 pounds for the non-touch, which we're going to focus on here because that's what this one is, and because, well, there is no touch MacBook Air. If you do go for the touch on this one, though, it's 2.8 pounds. For our MacBook Air, it's 2.96 pounds. Call it 3 pounds. So also a bit heavier, surprising there. The MacBook Air looks thinner because it tapers. It has those nearly razor-sharp edges right there to make it look super thin. So it's 0.11 inches at its thinnest point. But at its thickest point, it's 0.68 inches, which would be right in the middle here. So you can't even compare that edge to edge. The Dell is 0.33 inches, so it doesn't get as exquisitely pointy thin. Kind of they chopped off the thin section, think of it that way here, and left the middle in. And at its thickest point, it's 0.6 inches, so actually slightly thinner at its thickest point. Surprising when Windows actually starts to look good compared to Mac, isn't it, in terms of hardware? Okay, we're talking hardware at the moment. Flip them over, you got more metal on both of these guys. Dell has the usual rubber ridges here, stop it from sliding around. You got your ventilation here. You got your little service tag / serial number door under a spring-loaded latch right there. MacBook Air, simple, clean, 4 rubber feet on each corner. Neither of these goes skitty, skitty, slidey, slidey. The rubber is effective. You can open them up with Torx screwdriver. The MacBook Air, Macs in general, are famously really challenging to upgrade there. The battery packs, for example, are laid out in such a way as to get in the way of things. The Dell has upgradable M2 SSD storage, a socketed wireless card. Both of these have RAM soldered on, so order them with the amount of RAM you want. Both of these are available with 4 or 8 gigs of DDR3L RAM. You can't get 16 on either of these. So if you're a super duper power user and you really manage to use that many demanding programs, multiple windows, multitasking on a small machine like this, more power to you, but neither of these is for you people who believe you need 16 gigs of RAM. Pricing on these guys. Once again, the XPS 13 is a challenge because there's so many things it competes against. When it's going against the MacBook Air, it's a pretty straight across thing. If we talk non-touch, the Dell XPS starts at $799. That's a Core i3. You can't go as low as a Core i3 on the MacBook Air. It's Core i5 for the lower end there. Again, that 1.4 gigahertz. The MacBook Air starts at $999, so $200 price difference. But to make it more even, let's talk the Core i5. 4 gigs of RAM, 128 gig SSD, just like our $999 base MacBook Air. Well, that is going to set you back $899, so it's $100 cheaper for the Dell. Doesn't mean you get cheaper stuff inside. You get dual band Wi-Fi 802.11 AC Broadcom in here, Intel in here, Bluetooth 4.0. and backlit keyboard. And while we're talking about what you might get extra, the Dell actually has a higher resolution display. So now we have them opened up. Again, both of these are not touchscreens. macOS doesn't really support a touchscreen, so what would be the point? Windows 8.1 obviously does. We have the live tile interface right there as well. So you might want to consider touch with the XPS 13. That's going to bring up the price though. There's a nicely configured model, but it's $12.99. That gets you a QHD Plus 3200 by 1800 resolution touchscreen, 8 gigs of RAM, and a 128 gig SSD if you're buying from Dell, or a 256 gig SSD if you're buying from Microsoft. It seems to be varying a little bit with the pricing, but around $12.99 for that. But our model right here is the $8.99 configuration. Beautiful display here. It's a sharp IGZO panel, 1920 by 1080 resolution, and it's a matte display, so it doesn't have as much glare. Our Mac, still has a TN panel. Now, TN panels are not as great, but they manage very wide viewing angles with it nonetheless, and great colors and contrast, so it's not so much of a complaint there. Runs at 1440 by 900 resolution. Apple does a little bit different aspect ratio, so the height to width is going to be a little bit different, but you're getting actually higher resolution on the Dell. For less. Sure, Windows laptops usually tend to cost a little bit less than Macs, but there's that. The thing is, it depends on your eyes too. 1920 by 1080 is fine in the Metro environment with live tiles right here. But if you're in the desktop, you might actually have to enable scaling, and you might be getting something closer to 600, 900 resolution effectively if you use DPI scaling in Windows. Still a bit higher resolution than the Mac at that point. There you have it. One more thing about the displays too is that the Dell has very good color gamut. 98% of sRGB, so that beats our MacBook Air. Now, if you look at the MacBook Pros, you're getting into the same color gamut there. At MacBook Air, it doesn't get quite the same level of display, nor the same resolution as the Pro models. Maybe it'll change in the future, but for now, that's the case. Both of these have very good island-style keyboards and large glass trackpads. Both of them, they recline back some. Plenty enough. About this, actually, the Dell goes back a little bit more. I don't think it's going to matter to a lot of people, given that the viewing angles on these are pretty good. Back to the keyboards, both about the same size keyboard, both island style, both are backlit. Neither of them has wildly deep key travel. When you get really thin machines, that's the price you're going to pay. They're both really nice to type on. I might lean slightly towards the MacBook Air here for my typing preference, but it's a really, really close call, and I think you can adjust to either of these in terms of key travel if you're used to big laptops with deeper key travel. Both pretty darn good. Dell does a very nice keyboard. Them and Lenovo, they're two of my favorite keyboards on the Windows market. In terms of trackpads, we all know how awesome the MacBook Air trackpad is when you're running Mac OS 10. Yosemite. Well, if you're running Windows, the trackpad drivers are not as awesome. They're okay, they're not bad, but they're not so awesome, and you're pretty much just using the default Windows driver. You're actually going to go with Microsoft's latest touchpad driver here. This is a Synaptics touchpad. It's actually quite good, and Microsoft's taken back the trackpad, and because there's so many mediocre trackpad drivers out there from manufacturers, so it's very reliable. The pinch zooming works good. The feel is just about identical on them. I still give the Mac the win here for trackpad under Mac OS, that is. Not if we're talking Windows there, but still pretty good. Interior, this is carbon fiber right here. It feels very nice. It's soft on the hands. It's soft touch. It looks kind of visually interesting. Jazzes up what could otherwise start to look like a slightly dull laptop from the keyboard deck perspective. Mac, clean silver lines. Mac's all about not, messing lines up and putting too many unnecessary design details from their standpoint on there. But when we look at the screens one more time, the big point to notice here, and by the way, these are both finger pinchers. If you have your hand behind when you're opening up the laptop, the lids hang down behind the laptop and they can pinch your fingers back a little bit. So be careful. Just look at the bezel difference. Wow. Because Dell wanted to make a small footprint laptop and they made the bottom section small correspondingly, they had no need to have any significant bezel around the sides or the top here. 5mm bezel when you're talking much larger, obviously, on the MacBook Air. And it's a little bit more apparent because they went with silver instead of black. A lot of manufacturers use black to, make the bezel kind of disappear. So this gives an ooh and ah factor. When you open this up, you're just like, whoa, wow. Plus, it's a very nice display with very good color gamut and all that sort of stuff. At least the Mac has room for a webcam in a normal position right up here, though. The Dell has the webcam down in the lower corner because there's no room for it anywhere else. And, well, you know, if you want to share your nose hairs with people, the Dell is the one to do that. When it comes to performance, well, the Dell has a bit more horsepower. The newer generation CPU doesn't really matter much. That helps for battery life more than anything else. We'll talk about that later, battery life. Higher clock speeds here, a bit higher performing CPU. Obviously, you're running different operating systems. Probably, if you're getting the Mac, you probably want to give Mac OS 10 Yosemite a try here, but still, apples for apples in terms of things like Photoshop, image processing, that sort of thing. You get more horsepower here. It's not a wild, huge difference, and the Mac is by no means a slouch, but if you're doing something that requires a lot of computational prowess, say like compiling code or something like that, the Dell will be a little bit quicker for you. It has Intel HD 5500 integrated graphics versus Intel 5000 graphics here. Now, the 5500 indicates a new generation more than anything else. Performance is not unlike Intel HD 4400 to 5000 graphics from last generation Haswell, which is what the MacBook Air is still running on. When it comes to ports, just about identical stuff here. We have two USB 3.0 ports, a mini display port on our Dell, and a audio jack and an SD card slot. Our Mac has the same thing, only it has a mini display port slash Thunderbolt port. So if you're going to use Apple's Thunderbolt display or Apple's Thunderbolt peripherals, then that comes into play too. But you're looking at pretty much the same stuff here. Neither of these has HDMI, but it's not such a big issue because you can get a mini display port to HDMI adapter, and it's nice to have the versatility of the mini HDMI port because mini HDMI actually supports higher resolution displays, daisy chaining of displays, so I'll take that any day. In terms of fan noise, neither of these really is a noisy machine. The fan hardly comes on either of those, whether it's streaming full HD video, doing work, developing websites, everyday MS Office kind of stuff. Really haven't had any problem with the fan coming on. Now, the Dell with the QHD Plus display, that may get a little bit warmer, a little bit hotter, a little bit noisier, but we're talking about, again, the non-touch version right here. So both pretty cool, both pretty quiet. Both have metal bottoms, so they do transfer heat, so you'll feel it more than, say, something with a plaster or a carbon fiber bottom. Lastly, there's battery life. Both of these have batteries that are sealed inside. Now, the MacBook Air has been the one to beat, and nobody has come close so far with an Ultrabook in the land of Windows. The Dell is the first one that's pretty much matching the MacBook Air. I feel like, again, for the non-touch version, Dell quotes 15 hours for the non-touch and 12 hours for the touch version. Apple claims 12 hours of wireless web use. So, you know, Dell doesn't exactly say what they think you're doing for that 15 hours. You get the idea. Anyway, between these two, each of them runs 10 to 12 hours on a charge. So this is the first time we don't have to say, well, this Ultrabook is really cool except for battery life when it comes to the MacBook Air. They're pretty much even here, and impressive. Really nice. So there it is, Dell XPS 13 2015 edition versus MacBook Air 13-inch, latest edition also. And for the first time ever, it looks like the Dell is the better buy, unless you want to run Mac OS. And understandably, you might want to run Mac OS, and obviously the Mac's going to win. But otherwise, in terms of portability, size, weight, the Dell wins. You get a higher resolution matte display, which I prefer to the glossy display here, although Apple does a pretty good job of combating massive glare, I have to say, for a glossy display. You get equal battery life on board. There it is. Either way, you're not going to lose, but I have to say the Dell is looking kind of good if your Windows is your thing. So that's the Dell XPS 13 2015 edition versus the latest generation MacBook Air 13.3-inch. And obviously, if you like Mac OS and that's a perfectly cool thing to like, well, then the Mac is still going to win no matter what because, well, it's the only one you can run Mac OS on. But otherwise, if you're considering both operating systems or you're thinking about putting Windows on the MacBook Air, the Dell XPS 13 really has it in spades. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to watch our video reviews of each of these laptops, read our written reviews, and hit that like button.